Team, welcome back to another episode on the Live, Perform, Compete podcast. Today, I'm joined by Brian Lai, who is the owner and is the main man, the head honcho at Primal Breath Work, company here based in Hong Kong, working with folks in all walks of life to become more educated, more aware, and just learn more about the breath. I'm really excited to have this conversation with Brian. As soon as I start the podcast, you're kind of one of the first names I put down on my list. Kind of a bit of backstory. I met Brian, I think it was almost about 3 years ago. We just moved into our new space at Coastal Fitness, had a little physio room. I think Brian reached out. He was kind of an unknown on the circuit at the time. And he was the only guy, certainly that I've ever worked with in Hong Kong, who had, real interest and focus on breath work. And Brian kind of reached out to myself and Ant and asked us if we could kind of sit down with him and experience some of the things that he was practicing and he was teaching to his people. So I remember we sat inside a tiny, cramped little physio room. I think there was 4 of us. And Brian took us through 45 minutes, a 60-minute breath session. And that was, probably one of the first experiences I'd had, working with breath work. And then led me on to my own exploration of things like Wim Hof and power breathing and breath retention. And that's kind of been something I've been exploring the last 3 years. But, in that time since meeting Brian, I've only seen this guy kind of grow, seen his name pop up everywhere on social media platforms, loads of people from like corporate executives to athletes to mindful folks and I guess people in the fitness space who've been working with him to learn more about breath work. And I'm really excited to have him here on the podcast. Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's great to finally chat with you again after 3 years now.
Yeah, I think after that very first meeting in that tiny little room, I then got you down to one of our athlete camps and you did a really cool segment for all the athletes. And it was that was more of a recovery type protocol after a big brutal weekend of work. But Brian, let me kind of hand this over to you because I've actually never asked you really about your story and what got you into this. So perhaps you can start telling us a bit about yourself and what you're doing right now, and then we'll kind of dig into your story.
Yeah, certainly. Right now, so I'm based in Hong Kong, and pretty much what takes up most of my time in terms of professional is breathwork. So I've been coaching breathwork to just pretty much anyone that wants to learn about breathwork in Hong Kong. So anywhere from athletes to just your regular Joes, to corporate, to just yogis, kind of anyone. And aside from that, I also do a medicinal mushroom company that we sell mostly in America. So things like Chinese medicine kind of stuff, like cordyceps, lion's mane, stuff like that. So I kind of work on those 2 things in my time.
Awesome. And I have to ask, breath work is quite a niche topic. And definitely 3 years ago, definitely wasn't as widely, information wasn't that accessible, and it just wasn't really spoken about all that much. So what is it that got you into breath work in the first place?
Yeah, so if you had kind of told me or asked me, maybe I've been doing this for about 6 years now, teaching for about 3. But if you had kind of approached me, maybe like say 7, 8 years ago, I didn't even know breathwork was a thing. I had no idea this kind of whole universe, this rabbit hole existed. The most I kind of heard about was things like meditation or yoga. So it was. If you told me that I'll be coaching breathwork, this is what I'll be doing with my time, my life, a few years down the track, it would be completely kind of just, it wouldn't even be within the scope of what I could even imagine back then. So I guess what got me into it originally was I used to work in finance in Australia in share trading and banking, like a typical kind of role that you go for when you're have an Asian background. No idea what you want to do. So, you just do business or economics or, stuff like that. So end up doing that, going down that kind of path. And then, maybe like 2 weeks into the job, I knew I hated it. Like, it just wasn't my thing. Just didn't like someone telling me what to do all the time. But, things happened and I stuck around for probably 5, 6 years. And then at that point in time, I was kind of getting really sick of it, wanted to leave. And one of my mates at the time wanted to try and make movies, get into film. So just decided to give that a go. had no background, no clue, like nothing to do with film aside from watching movies. And probably spent for the next 4 or 5 years after I quit finance to chase that dream to work on movies. And during that process, we came close to finishing the film. We didn't end up finishing it, unfortunately, but we did film it, and we made most of the film. But we ran out of money towards the very end, which kind of sucked. But through that whole process, I kind of began to meet people in that industry. A lot of people in the film industry, but also people, because I was producing, so I was trying to raise money for the film as well. So I met a lot of affluent people and people kind of in those circles. And throughout my whole life, that's kind of what I was chasing. I was always chasing. I wanted to be like rich. I wanted to have famous friends. I wanted to kind of be in that circle. I don't know if you ever watched Entourage, but growing up, I used to love watching Entourage, and that was kind of that kind of thing that I was chasing. Kind of like a pipe dream that I was chasing. But then as I began to know these kind of people, I kind of started realizing that all that money and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't necessarily make you happy, and I kind of started to realize that a lot of these people that I was meeting that had everything that I thought I wanted, but they were deep down pretty unhappy, and that kind of shattered my whole paradigm of what I was chasing in life and what I thought I was going for. And then that kind of set me on a bit of a downer. So kind of, I guess, looking back, was kind of like mild anxiety or something like that, some sort of pretty down kind of phase through my life. And from there, somehow that led me on to meditation. So I went to those 10-day retreats, those Vipassana retreats where you don't talk to anyone, you put your phone away, you can't even have a book, and you just meditate for like 10 hours a day for 10 days. So I did that. That was an absolute game changer in terms of, I didn't realize how crazy my mind was. I didn't realize how loud my mind was and how negative it could be until I really sat down during those 10 days and really tried to just quieten down and just learn meditation. But after that whole experience, I came out of it. It was an amazing experience, an absolute game changer, the whole Vipassana and the meditation journey. But it wasn't that practical. They recommend that to keep it up, to keep the progress up, you need to meditate for 1 to 2 hours, to 2 hours a day, actually. So 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour at nighttime. And for most people in today's society, that's not the most practical thing to follow, right? So after a while, my practice began to suffer. It began to halve and ended up being around 15 minutes, which is okay, but it's not ideal. And then this is back in Australia. It was back in Australia, and I think it was after I went camping. It was after a mushroom trip in Australia, and then we were just watching some random videos on YouTube, and the Wim Hof documentary came up, that Vice documentary on Wim Hof. I think it was released maybe like 3 months, 4 months before I had watched it then. And so it just popped up all of a sudden just during the autoplay on YouTube. And when we were watching, I was watching with a few buddies of mine. And everything that this dude was talking about, this Wim Hof guy was talking about, everything that he could do was just mind blowing to me. It was, it was everything that I wanted to be, everything that I wanted to learn. Basically, because growing up in Australia, I, in hindsight, I realized it's actually a lot to do with growing up in Australia, mouth breathing a lot, which has caused all these different health issues and all this kind of stuff growing up. So I grew up pretty shy, pretty insecure, just not confident, not ever really being my best self. And what this guy was able to do and talk about, building a stronger mindset, building a stronger, just immune system and just an internal system and just becoming the best version of yourself. So when I watched that, it just really resonated and clicked with me like nothing else had ever kind of resonated with before. And once I found that, I was straight away after the documentary, I looked at my friends, I was like, man, I have to learn it. That sounds wicked. And so I searched it up, and at that time he still wasn't that hugely popular yet, but he was still popular enough to be booked out for like a year or two. So at that time I thought, okay, that's a sign that's, I'm not meant to learn from this guy. He's booked out for a couple of years. And this, I think this was before the Joe Rogan experience, before the Tim Ferriss experience as well. So this is before he really blew up. And then next thing you know it, because his new wife, his new partner is Aussie. So a week later, when I first discovered him, a week later he launched his first camp in Australia. So I ended up being the first person to sign up for the camp in Australia, and that was in 2016. And yeah, and that's when I started learning from Wim directly over in Australia. And at that point in time, I only went for myself. I had no intention of coaching. I have no intention of anything, rather than just to really learn the tools for myself. But during that first time I trained with Wim, which was one whole week, 7 days, we were all like living together. We were just, breathing every morning, going to ice baths, hiking, doing all this, just basically training for the entire week with Wim, with 20 other people. And just the kind of the changes that I saw, just not just in myself, but the changes that I could observe with the other participants, the other people there, who are now, they're still good friends of mine, was just unreal. It's just nothing like I had ever come across. For example, there was this guy there that was, he had really bad arthritis, and his fingers were kind of like stiffened and fused like this. And he's only probably in mid-40s, late 40s day. He just had pain all throughout his body, particularly his hands, from that arthritis. And just after the first day with the breath work with the ice bath, he was able to move his hands again, get, probably 70-80% mobility back in his fingers, back in his hands, and the pain was gone. The pain was manageable. That was just one. Then there was another girl there that was just really kind of really, really beautiful soul, really like this Indian girl there that was suffering from mental health issues, and she was going through really bad depression, and she was suicidal, And so, her case was pretty bad that, when I was talking to her about it, she would say that just, almost every moment, of every day, if her mind wasn't occupied by something, she would be thinking about how she could end it. Like if she saw a tree during a walk, she would think about how she could tie a noose around that tree, or something like that. So, and I think on the first or second day when we were going through the class with Wim, and he was asking everyone what everyone was there for, there was a few people that said they were there for depression and mental health and stuff like that. And I remember he told this girl, this Indian girl, that he'll be able to help her within a week, that he'll be able to cure her within a week. And coming from growing up in my family, I've got cousins, I've got aunties, I've got several relatives, several friends myself that have, depression or anxiety or stuff like that. So mental health is nothing too new to me. But when he said that I'm going to cure you in 1 week, I didn't really believe it. I was like, I've seen how it impacts all these people around me. I'm like, how can you fix like decades, years, a lifetime of conditioning of your state within a week, let alone ever. And sure enough, after a week, these people had changes, and particularly this girl. I remember chatting to her on the last night when we were sitting around the campfire, just kind of reminiscing and just hanging out. And she said that she was cured. And I asked her, why did you say that? And she said, I don't think about killing myself anymore. And that alone was just like really, really powerful. And I think at that time I was kind of thinking, this will be something great to learn, to share, to give back. And because it did so much for me as well, like it got rid of my anxiety, it just made me a much more confident person, and just made me just be able to chase my dreams and kind of be able to manage that fear that I've always had growing up. And I might still have it, but obviously I can manage it a lot better now. All that stress, anxiety, fear, and stuff like that. And then I guess since then, and actually after that, it was after that 1 week retreat, I went camping with my brother straight afterwards. This is in Australia in the Blue Mountains, and we went camping. And I went hiking with him, and somewhere along the way, I just my mind, my body, I don't know where, it just released, dumped a massive load of DMT, like endogenous DMT into my system. And because I had done DMT before, I knew what it was. I had felt it, I experienced it before, but this is something else. It was just this natural trip that I had. And it just made me feel the best I think any human being could feel. And I was thinking to myself, wow, if this is what Wim Hof is able to feel, if this is the state that Wim Hof can trigger and can be in when he wants to be in, this is just absolutely amazing. I feel the best I could possibly ever feel. And that endogenous DMT trip lasted like, I think almost like an hour. And that was the time I was like, wow, like this thing is crazy. Like this thing is so powerful. There's levels to this. And from that experience, I decided that I wanted to pursue learning more. And over the next 2 or 3 years, I continued to train with Wim. And eventually, I think 2017, on my birthday as well, I became one of the first instructors in Australia and Asia for the Wim Hof Method. And that was pretty much my training with Wim Hof. And then there's a bit more to the story. Almost there, man.
Keep on going. I'm loving it.
So my biggest fear, aside from I think cockroaches and stuff, but my biggest fear is public speaking. So just being in front of more than 3 or 4 people used to fill me with just massive amounts of stress and anxiety. So I was a pretty shy, pretty insecure kid, growing up, pretty quiet, introverted kid. So I never thought I would ever kind of get past my fear of public speaking. So after the year after I became certified, I didn't really do much with my certification. I didn't really teach much. I taught, a few friends, family here and there, but I kind of just let that negative self-talk, that fear, kind of just start to creep up. And I told myself that I'm going to focus on my business and on all the other projects that I was doing at that time. But deep down, it was really fear that was holding me back. Just that fear of just being in front of people and so I never thought I'd get over that fear. So about a year after I became certified, I kind of gave up on coaching, on teaching. And I just thought to myself, like, I'm just going to learn for myself and that'll be it. And then what happened was I was coming back from Australia, back to Hong Kong at that time. And I landed in Hong Kong at nighttime. And the next morning I went out to Yum Cha with a few relatives, catch up with a few auntie and uncles. And then on the way home, so after lunch on the way home, I was walking through a shopping mall to get home. And this was at 8 p.m. So that was at Kwun Tong on the Calvin side. And as I was walking through the mall, this woman jumped off the top and she landed, she obviously trying to commit suicide, and she landed like probably about 10, 15 meters away from me. And I kind of saw the whole thing, and it was pretty traumatizing, to be honest, like when that happened. But after a couple of weeks, I kind of got over it. After a couple of weeks, it was kind of just really popping up in my head. Like every time I closed my eyes, I would see it. And it was pretty traumatizing. But one day I just said to myself, I can't let that mess with me too much, like I'm letting it affect my life too much. So I think one day I went back to where she, her final place, and which is at the ground level of the mall. And I just kind of stood there and just kind of felt everything and just kind of breathed through it. And it took me maybe, I don't know, maybe like 15 minutes of just standing there and breathing and stuff. And then I think I got through it. I got over it. But at that kind of point in time, I kind of had this kind of thought, this kind of like, I guess it's like this thought that just said, this is why you should be teaching. Like, this is why you should teach. Because I don't know if you've ever followed the Wim Hof story, but the Wim Hof story started because his wife committed suicide because of depression and schizophrenia. So she was on antidepressants and stuff like that, and she eventually jumped off the building and left him alone with his 4 kids. several years ago. So I kind of just, at the time I was reading The Alchemist, that book. And, The Alchemist is always talking about signs and omens. And, I just kind of took that as a sign to start pursuing it. And that was when I was going out there and trying to approach people. And you guys at Coast Fitness was one of the guys that I approached about starting doing this breathwork thing in Hong Kong. So that was about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. And here I am now.
Mate, that is a gnarly introduction. But that was awesome. I mean, there's so many parts that I want to talk about. Actually, to be honest, I also want to hear about the years you spent trying to make a movie, not being able to produce it, but that's probably not the point of this podcast. I'd love to actually hear. Okay, the first question I'm going to ask then is to tell me about that experience with Wim Hof on that week. And perhaps our listeners actually don't know who Wim Hof is. So maybe a bit more of an introduction on who he is and kind of what he's been doing in the world. But then I'd love to hear about that week of experience and kind of what that looked like.
Yeah, certainly, man. Okay, so Wim Hof, for those out who don't have much exposure about Wim Hof or know who Wim Hof is. So Wim Hof is a Dutchman. I think he lives in Amsterdam or close by. And he's created this kind of method called the Wim Hof Method, which involves breathing techniques, breath work, cold exposure, and mindset, like mindfulness, cultivating a strong mindset. This guy Wim Hof, how he started was he had so roughly 40 years ago, which I just mentioned, he had already been starting to practice all these breathing techniques and all these he was already playing around with that stuff. Mm. And then eventually his wife committed suicide from mental health, schizophrenia, depression, bipolar, stuff like that. And from there, he kind of just doubled down on everything. He was trying to look for an answer to help these people with these health issues, mental health and physical health issues. And he couldn't really find a satisfactory answer from, the Western medicine or from doctors and stuff. So he really began to double down on these breathing techniques and cold exposure and these things that he was doing. And he just through his own experience, he was making himself very strong. He was able to do all these kind of crazy feats and eventually started breaking world records. He's got 26 world records, all in extreme weather, extreme cold. For example, just being submerged into ice all the way up to his neck for his full body for about 2 hours, being able to maintain his body temperature, his core body temperature at a stable level throughout, and even raising it when it needs to. Swimming under the ice for, I think, the longest amount of duration, length on one breath. I think that's been broken now, but at that time he did break that record. And as an interesting story to that world record was when he was trying to break that world record, his eyeballs froze over and he couldn't see. So he almost died because he missed a hole. So he's had a bunch of near-death experiences. He's climbed Everest and Mount Shinezka and Kilimanjaro and a bunch of other mountains in just his shorts, just his underwear. He's able to guide other people to do the same thing. He guided like a 60-plus-year-old guy with triple bypass surgery up Mount Kilimanjaro, I believe, with the training that he teaches people. And, everyone was saying that this girl was crazy, that this guy's going to die. And Wim Hof said he was going to do it in, I think, 4 days or 6 days. And the media and everyone just thought he was crazy, thought you're going to kill this guy. And then he ended up bringing this guy up and down in 2 days. So this guy, 60-year-old, triple bypass surgery. But anyway, so this is what Wim Hof has been doing. He's been breaking all his world records, and he's been telling people that he can begin to really control his own immune system, and not just the immune system, but different parts of his nervous system. And people laughed at it, 20, 30 years ago when he started telling people about this stuff. People just thought this guy was a nutcase. This guy was crazy. And it was only after the world records, the 26 world records that he broke, that scientists began to take a more look at a focus on him. And I think it was in the Radboud University, a couple of scientists decided to give him a try. Just give him an opportunity, and began to study him. And I think this was around 2010 or somewhere around there. somewhere around there. So I think there's been a lot of scientific studies around for the last decade or so on Wim Hof. And what they found was that Wim Hof didn't respond to a pathogen, which is an E. coli virus, a dead E. coli virus that they put with his blood. And his blood didn't react the same as what a normal person would react. Nothing really much happened. It should make someone very sick. It should make someone nauseous, vomit, throw up, a headache, just really bad flu-like symptoms, or stuff like that. And then they put it under a microscope, and they put the endotoxin with his blood. Nothing really much happened to his blood. So they tested him next. So they injected the endotoxin to him, and pretty much the same thing happened. Like nothing really happened. He had a mild headache for, I think, just a short period, but he was able to manage it and breathe it away, whereas most people would have got pretty violently ill. And then they said, maybe you're just a freak of nature. Maybe you're just a mutant or something. And he said, no, what I can do, anyone can really do. So he trained, I think, 20 people or something like that. There was two groups. One got training, one didn't. He trained them for 10 days. He trained one group for 10 days with breathing and cold exposure. And then they did the same thing. They injected these subjects with endotoxin, and the same results were replicated. So the people that got the training from Wim for the 10 days, the same thing. Nothing really much happened to them. They had a mild response, and that was it. Whereas the other group that didn't get the training, they all ended up getting very sick. So Wim Hof, the breathing technique that Wim does. So what Wim has really brought to the world, it's not really the breathing techniques, because the breathing techniques that he does is actually based on really ancient Tibetan tumor meditation techniques. So they've been around for thousands and thousands of years, and I'll talk about a bit more about the origins of that. But what Wim has done is he's brought it to science. He's getting it, using himself as a guinea pig for the last decade or so. He's let scientists just willingly just testing every step of the way. And he's basically taken away a lot of the woo-ness and all the kind of the mystical side of breathing and breath work and stuff like that, and really tried to demystify it. And I guess in the process now, because there's so much more scientific research, not just on Wim Hof Method, but on breathing in general. I don't know if you ever heard of a guy called Andrew Huberman, who's kind of blowing up recently.
Yeah, Dr. Huberman, he's amazing.
Yeah, he blew up after he got on Joe Rogan a few months ago. But he's been a hero of the breathwork world for a while now. We've been following this guy for years, and he's always talking about just doing all the latest research. And he was one of the first scientists to really study Wim Hof as well. And this was a few years ago. But all the research and stuff is really starting to show, and that's the reason why fields, military, more from the upper echelon of the world's top performers are really beginning to use breathwork now, because it's a low-hanging fruit in terms of increasing the performance. It's such an easy kind of hack to really incorporate into your daily life. It's really a no-brainer once you really understand how easily how the breath can affect us. So Wim Hof is this dude he's taken this really ancient breathing technique called Tibetan tumor meditation, which if you look it up, the monks, it was actually created by the monks and the hermits in the high altitude, Himalayas, in freezing temperatures. And they created this technique as a survival mechanism. So it wasn't designed for sports performance or for spiritual purposes to begin with. It was designed as a way to just increase metabolism, create body heat. Tumor meditation in Sanskrit means inner fire. So that's why we can do the things in the ice and the cold and hike the mountains, go into ice baths, because the breathing technique is designed to really help generate heat in the body. And so you get these monks that will go out into the freezing temperatures of the mountains at like midnight, I believe, and they'll do these ceremonies. It's kind of like tournaments, they're kind of like kumites or something. And they'll go out, and what they'll do is they'll drape wet towels over themselves in freezing temperatures, and they'll need to dry off as many towels as they can using the body heat that they generate from the breathing. and also melt the ice underneath them. So tumor meditation, which is what Wim Hof Method breathing is derived from, is nothing new. It's been around forever. And Wim Hof himself is probably like the fourth person to bring it to the West. So none of this is really new. It's just that what Wim Hof has done is really taken it to science and is now caught on and starting to get into, the mainstream media and starting to really hit the mainstream now. And along with Wim Hof, there's all these other teachers and gurus and breathwork experts in this world that are really, really spreading this movement. You got guys like Dan Brule, you've got guys, Brian McKenzie, Casper. You've got all these people around the world that are really spreading breathwork now. So it's making a resurgence again, and it's really going to be in the next 10 years. I think it's going to be one of those things like yoga or mobility, or just something that, it's one of the main pillars of health that we've kind of neglected. And I think it's once people get educated about breathing and how breathing impacts your health and well-being, it's gonna be incorporated into people's lives again, as like supplements, or like anything else you would do.
I mean, it's interesting. So for those who don't know what Wim Hof looks like, you hear about 26 world records, you're probably thinking about some mutant athlete of a man, but he's not. He's far from it. He's got a massive beard. He's like, doesn't have a whole amount of hair left on his head, and he definitely doesn't look, by most people in this day and age definition of athlete, probably doesn't look like a normal athlete. But it's amazing his feats of human performance, which is still comes under, has been really amazing. And I said it at the start of the episode, after I did that first session with you, you mentioned Wim Hof, and I hadn't heard of him at the time. And so I went on my own exploration with some Wim Hof breathing techniques and incorporated it into my kind of daily schedules, using the power breaths and the breath retention. Then led me to read a book quite recently called The Oxygen Advantage, which is, really brings, I think, breathing techniques into probably more layman terms for people to understand. And whilst I understood, the concepts behind it, and I feel like I always have done, it really brought to light just the importance and the impact of breathing, specifically nasal breathing. And you've kind of talked about a couple of things already, and you mentioned the words, but you've talked about breath work, and you've talked about, cold water immersion or cold therapy. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, Brian, because, for a lot of people, they're hearing breath work and breathing, and they're probably thinking, well, I breathe every day. How can this become something I need to learn more about, or how can I possibly be breathing wrong? So, what is that? What is it in breathing that we're doing wrong? And how can just breath work, done a certain way, have such profound impact on the immune system, stress management, mental health, and sports performance? So I don't even know where you're going to start with that, but.
Yeah, I mean, how breathing impacts everything. I mean, like, to be these are some studies and estimates as well. So they would say roughly like 80 to 90% of modern civilization has dysfunctional breathing. They're not breathing at the most optimal. And aside from just the breathing mechanics and how most people are breathing because they're sitting in offices, they're sitting in tight kind of cubicles and chairs, which kind of forces them to kind of breathe in a certain way where they expand vertically as opposed to horizontally. So you have those kind of issues which can be fixed. The stuff that I teach is, helps with those kind of things. You have the biochemistry of breath work, which is what the Oxygen Advantage is about the whole carbon dioxide, the Bohr effect, and all those different things as well. But in terms of breathing, I don't know if there's a great book called Breathe by James Nestor, which got released I think a few months ago, and he's just really taken the world by storm. He's been going on Joe Rogan, Rich Roll, and he's been going on like every cool podcast. So check that book out. It's an amazing book, Breathe. Basically through his book and through what he's doing, what they basically found is that if you look at jaws, like if you look at the skulls of tribes that haven't really been touched by modern civilization, and if you look at human skulls from roughly 400 or 500 years ago and older, the shape of the skulls and the jaws and teeth are perfect. There's no crooked teeth. It doesn't look like a savage or anything. It's perfect. You know, it looks like one of those Dali commercials or one of those Dali toothpaste commercials. It looks absolutely perfect. And it's completely counterintuitive of what we would think. You know, we would think now in modern ages, we evolve, we get better. But if you look at the jaw structure, the anatomical structure of the skull and the jaw, the teeth and everything, it's way, way better back then. So if you really think about society as a whole, human race as a whole, we are the worst breathers of the animal kingdom. You know, we constantly have crooked teeth, small jaws. You know, we need to take wisdom teeth out. You know, I myself, I've had 8 teeth taken out, you know, 4 wisdom teeth and, you know, 4 adult molars to make way for my jaw because my jaw was too small. And, you know, growing up in Australia, I was breathing through my mouth a lot because I had allergies growing up. So, and mouth breathing, I've found out, you know, it impacts, you know that slang where they call people a mouth breather and it's a bad thing. I didn't really understand until recently, but basically I don't know if you have kids or anyone around with kids that are listening to this, but when basically a kid and even as an adult, when your breathing is not how it's supposed to be, which should be through the nose, nasal breathing, and from the diaphragm, that's how we should be breathing mostly day to day. Even during exercise, we want to keep the nasal breathing as much as we can. But what happened was because of the industrialization of food, so roughly 400 or 500 years ago, the industrial age started and food became softer. So food became more processed and softer. And because of that, basically people in general don't really use their jaws as much anymore to chew food. They would estimate that before that, humans would chew roughly on average 6 hours a day. So we'd spend 6 hours a day chewing. And after industrialization of food, that's gone down. Okay, but because of it's gone down, we don't use our jaws as much anymore, and our jaws have become shrunk and undeveloped. You know, and it's 400 or 500 years. You know, over 4 or 5 generations now, it's pretty much affected everyone across the board, where our jaws have kind of shrunk and underdeveloped now. And because of that, it doesn't just affect the anatomy of our skull and the shape of our skull and the width of our jaw and stuff, but it also begins to tighten the airways in the back of our throat because our jaws are now anatomically smaller and tighter. And because our airways are, you know, most people's airways are now tighter because of that, it's pretty much affecting everyone. So aside from all the other breathing issues that is impacting and affecting, you know, most of the people out there, just almost like on a systemic level, this is happening across the board. So, you know, especially for kids, so roughly they say for kids, it's roughly around 5 to 10 years old. Around that age range is when they begin to move from a perfect breath, like a nasal diaphragmatic breathing, and it begins to move up the body into the chest and becomes more of a shallow breath. So it's around 5 to 10 years old for most people where their breathing begins to shift and begin to develop bad habits. So not just for adults, but for kids, if anyone has kids that are roughly around that age, really pay attention to their breathing now and really just try to do your best to make sure they stick to, you know, how they're supposed to breathe, how their body's designed to breathe. Because a whole host of issues happen because when you start to shallow breathe, you start to mouth breathe, you know, for decades and decades and decades throughout your whole life. The acidity, the alkaline of your body is going to be more, you know, more on the acidic side because you're always over breathing. You're not getting enough oxygen. You become very carbon dioxide intolerant, which, you know, carbon dioxide tolerance, as you probably know through reading Oxygen Advantage now, that, you know, it has a big correlation to stress resilience and how people can handle stress and the sensitivity and the arousal rate of their nervous system. So how easily they get emotionally triggered or stuff like that. You know, those things have a correlation and have a direct link to someone's relationship with carbon dioxide. So breathing, that's just one aspect of how breathing is impacting society. But aside from that, just people just work in offices and stuff and just the way they breathe, it's really just putting them into like a stressful state, like a sympathetic state for longer than they really should be throughout the day. And when that's throughout the day, when that's, you know, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, then, you know, your body's not designed to be constantly in a sympathetic state. You know, it's like having a car constantly, you know, stepping on the gas pedal, constantly redlining the car. You know, it's not designed for that. You know, human beings are designed for massive amounts of acute stress. You're your CrossFit coach, your gym coach, and you apply massive amounts of stress on yourself and on your clients, and we can handle that. But you can't imagine doing that same amount of stress on someone for a whole week without rest, right? But that's what we're doing to ourselves internally, to our immune system, our nervous system, all the different systems inside that we can't see. We're burning them out. We're either burning them out or we're not using them as efficiently as we should be. And breathing is, to be honest, I would say most people don't breathe optimally.
Okay, let me jump in there. So the concept of nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, you kind of started to touch on, a few of the disadvantages, or I guess the impact of actually breathing through our mouths. You touched on, kind of mentioned, CO2 tolerance, and that's potential impact on the way we feel, and our immune system. But really, what is it? If we can just quickly dive into that in a bit more detail. What is it about nasal breathing that makes it so beneficial to us? And what is it about mouth breathing that is so detrimental to us?
Yeah, sure. So if you kind of just break down, if you look at like a cross section, or you break down the human skull, the human body, it's kind of obvious that breathing, the size of the nasal cavity, or the kind of different filters and all the kind of different mechanisms within the respiratory system through the nasal cavity, it's kind of obvious that once you kind of take a deeper look at that, or you look into that more, that's how our body's designed to breathe. It really is designed to breathe through the nose. So Patrick McEwen, the guy that does the whole oxygen advantage and potato method, he would say that mouths are for eating and talking, noses are for breathing. And if you look at, for example, a racehorse or a cheetah, they don't mouth breathe. If they mouth breathe, they're sick. And the top marathon runners, they all nasal breathe all the way through to the end. They don't need to mouth breathe. So when you nasal breathe, there's a lot of different reasons as to why you nasal breathe, but just firstly for health reasons. So a lot of people think our nasal cavity, if you want to kind of feel the nasal cavity, how big it is, what you can do is just get your tongue, touch the top of the roof of your mouth, and just swipe it along the roof of your mouth. That whole area is the floor of your nasal cavity. So it's massive, it's huge. And your nasal cavity, people think it's just like, for example, two pipes or two kind of airways that go through. But it's actually more like two conches, like two seashells, like it's like a turbine almost. So it's a really complex set of mechanisms and infrastructures that you're breathing through when you go through the nose. And when you go through the nose, it's your body's first innate kind of line of defense against kind of pathogens, or anything that's exogenous kind of things that are floating around, and especially with coronavirus and all kinds of nasty things, especially in Hong Kong. It's pretty polluted here. You want to really use your body's natural way to filter and clean the air, which is through the nose. Whereas when you breathe through the mouth, there's no filter at all. So everything that's floating around, it's just as raw air. It's like when you go through the nose, it kind of humidifies it, spins it through the sinuses, and it makes it, perfect for the lungs to take in. Through the mouth, it's very harsh, and it's just not how we're supposed to be breathing most of the time. Aside from cleaning the air, humidifying the air, and all that kind of stuff as well, when you breathe through the nose, usually, I mean, not so much these days, but when you breathe through the nose, it usually helps bring it down to your diaphragm more. So generally you should kind of just help you breathe deeper into your diaphragm more. And when you breathe deeper, and aside from nasal breathing, the other important thing is diaphragmatic breathing. So breathing from your diaphragm is just as important, maybe even more important. Because breathing from the diaphragm acts as a pump for your lymphatic system. And if you're shallow breathing, you're not breathing deep, and you're not really using your diaphragm as a pump for your internal organs, then the biggest system that you have, your lymphatic system, to help remove toxins from your body, that pump you're not really using. And when you use it efficiently, up to 70% of your body's metabolic waste toxins are removed through the system. And if you're not doing deep diaphragmatic breathing, using this diaphragm as the pump for the system, the biggest tool that your body has to help detox and remove toxins from your body, you're not using. In a place like Hong Kong, that's it's one of the lowest hanging fruits in terms of just helping you cleanse your system, cleanse your body. People spend thousands of dollars to get detox programs and stuff like that, when the biggest detox thing that they have is literally inside them, and it's through their deep diaphragmatic breathing. So that's one thing as well. And also when you nasal breathe, it generally kind of slows down the inflow and outflow of air as opposed to mouth breathing, just because of the size of the actual airway. And because of that, it allows us to, deal with it lets our body deal with carbon dioxide a bit more. So it allows carbon dioxide to kind of build up a bit more on the exhale, and when we breathe in, for example, slows everything down, and it allows us to develop a higher tolerance towards carbon dioxide.
Now, Brian,
what I mentioned.
Why is that important from a health perspective? Why is building up a bigger tolerance to carbon dioxide important?
Yeah, well, they've been doing studies, especially they've been doing a lot of studies at Hughes lab, and also Brian McKenzie's, the guys they're doing. What they found is that the carbon dioxide is, they call it the stress messenger molecule of the body. So aside from your amygdalas, those two kind of pea-sized glands in your brain, your brainstem area, which kind of where fear and excitement comes from. So aside from those two glands, another way that your body kind of signals to your system that you're going through stress, or whatever stress, fear, anxiety, whatever it is, some sort of stress, is carbon dioxide. So if you're very tolerant to carbon dioxide, then you're not as sensitive. So if you're very sensitive to carbon dioxide, then that would kind of generally lead someone to be kind of less resilient towards stress, because that signal to send out stress signals in your system, it keeps getting triggered more easily than someone else that has a higher tolerance towards carbon dioxide. But also not just that, but also your tolerance towards carbon dioxide, your adaptation towards carbon dioxide, your lack of, is also directly connected to your nervous system, and how sensitive, how easily aroused your nervous system is. So for example, if you're someone that gets triggered very easily, you go from 0 to 100 very easily, then you probably have a pretty low tolerance towards carbon dioxide. So people that can handle stress more, can handle high amounts of stress, generally have a higher CO2 tolerance. And it's kind of it's not like it's not like something that you should base your entire health on, but it's one of those kind of good measurements to kind of factor your breathing health, or where your breathing health is at right now. So you can look it up. What you can do is you can do a carbon dioxide tolerance test.
The bulk test?
Not so much a bulk test, but similar to the bulk test. The bulk. So this is for the guys at home that are listening. If you guys want to test your carbon dioxide tolerance, so what you can do is, so you just breathe normally, breathe in through your nose, out through your nose. Just do that, just maybe 4 or 5 times, just to relax yourself first. And then on the fifth breath, or on the last one, take a deep breath in, fill your lungs up as much as you can, to fully in on the inhale. And then once you reach the top of the inhale, just start a timer. So get a phone or a watch and just start the timer, and then just start to exhale as slowly as you can, and see how long you can make that exhale. So deliberately, on purpose, prolong that exhale as much as you can. And basically see how long you can exhale for, and just time that, how long you can do the exhale for. And if you swallow, if your throat contracts, if you stop for any particular reason, that counts as the end of the exhale. And what they've shown is that anything under 20 seconds is pretty bad. You really need to take a good look at your breathing mechanics and just your breathing health if you're 20 seconds and under. 20 to 40 is pretty common. So that's just the average Joe, that's probably where they're at. So it's common, but it's not ideal. 40 to 60 is okay. It's not bad. It's probably like, if I was a teacher and I was grading someone, I was probably like a B or C or something like that. And then 60 to 80 is where we should be aiming for. So just for the average person, 60 to 80 on that Excel test, on the CO2 tolerance test, is where we should be aiming for. For maybe elite athletes or people that are really into health and fitness, like yourself and even myself as well, you want to be aiming for probably 80 seconds and above.
And that's a continual, gradual, as slow as possible exhale. So at no point you're actually holding your breath.
Exactly right. Yeah. And inhale through the nose, exhale through the nose. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I know reading the Oxygen Advantage, they talk about a lot of different tests, Bolt tests, which I've been playing around, and then they got the other one where you're moving. I can't remember what it's called. The nasal clearing thing is another one as well. All very, very similar. I definitely scored very averagely on all the tests, and I know it certainly highlighted something that I definitely need to work on. But something you alluded to a second ago was, this shouldn't be the be all and end all of your whatever you call it, your investment into your health and fitness. But at the same time, it's probably the easiest thing that people can do to actually start seeing wholesale changes. I mean, even, myself, I've been conscious of breath work and breathing for a very long time. I did the Wim Hof stuff with you 3 years ago, and it's always been in the back of my mind with everything I've done. Big fan of Dr. Huberman, big fan of Brian McKenzie and Shift and all the stuff he's talking about that he believes really passionately in. But still, it's not something that I put as much emphasis into my daily routines as I do like a sleep routine or supplementation or movement training or strength training. And, rereading the Oxygen Advantage and already just listening to you speak is making me realize that it's so easy. There's nothing that's needed. There's nothing required. You can do it, just as long as you allocate the time and the energy towards doing it. So yeah, just kind of jumping on that. Something I want to just talk about real quick then, if you could just kind of break this down for us. If we've talked about the importance of nasal breathing and its impact on things like CO2 tolerance, let's talk about mouth breathing. And a lot of people talk about, when they refer to mouth breathing, they call it over breathing. So what is that whole concept about, and why is that so detrimental?
Yeah, so just kind of the link between, I guess, nasal and mouth breathing is also, so what they found is over the age of 30, I think it's over 30, I believe, maybe 40, but I believe it's 30 years of age. After that, most of the bulk amount of the nitric oxide in your body is released through your sinuses. And so breathing is actually a 3-gas system. So it's oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitric oxide. They actually discovered a 4th gas in microdoses, I think literally a few weeks ago. I don't know too much about that, but it's a 3 or 4 gas system. So when you breathe through the nasal cavity, when you breathe through that, it actually bypasses your sinuses. And when it bypasses through your sinuses, it pulls in that nitric oxide that's produced in your system naturally into your system. And when you mouth breathe, it doesn't do that. It doesn't bypass the sinus cavities. So it doesn't actually bring in that nitric oxide. So for someone like yourself who's an athlete and you want the maximum performance as you can, you really want to be breathing through your nose as much as you can to bring in that nasal that nitric oxide. Because nitric oxide is it's kind of like rocket boosters for the human being. It is a vasodilator. It opens up all your blood vessels to allow for more faster and efficient transfer of energy throughout your system. And it's one of the most lowest hanging fruits for someone that wants to maximize performance, is to take advantage of that nitric oxide. And I'm sure you, as a trainer, you probably have seen countless amounts of supplements that have to do with nitric oxide, where we can actually learn to release that ourselves. I mean, I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent a bit here, but just for you guys and for your listeners, for the audience, here's a little hack that you can actually do as well for your coastal fitness dudes. Is that what they found is that like monks and yogis and they'll do these chants and stuff like Om and all these kind of different chants and stuff. So there's probably some sort of meaning and stuff to the actual mantras and chants that they do. But what they've found is that if you take away all that stuff and just leave it, without any sort of dogma to it, when you hum on the exhale, so when you hum, kind of like when monks Om and stuff like that, so when you hum, it creates kind of vibrations, and it does something to the sinuses. And it actually, they've measured the releases of nitric oxide through the sinus cavities during humming up to 15 times more, so up to 15-fold. So it's literally like a little hack. So especially when you're exhausted, when you're training people, when you're going through your own exercise or training, or your clients are exhausted, that could be something you could do, is focus on nasal breathing, but also humming. So you in through the nose and out through the mouth, but you're humming on the exhale, and that will help increase the release of nitric oxide into your system, opens up all the blood vessels, and obviously it's going to help energy energy and recovery through your system a lot faster, a lot easier. That's just another hack as well. But so when you mouth breathe, getting back to that, when you mouth breathe, you don't bypass the sinuses. You don't bring in that nitric oxide, which is, you know, one of the most important gases for us to use. But when you mouth breathe, you don't filter any of the air. So it's you know, anything that's floating in the air, it's coming through. And when you mouth breathe, basically, from a performance level, aside from the cleanliness and the hygiene of all the actual air, from the actual performance level. So when you nasal breathe, so when you breathe through your nose, you know, I think in Brian McKenzie's Shift and Out of Breath and stuff like that, and also Casper and there's more kind of modern breath workers, they've kind of broken down your breathing into different gears, kind of like a vehicle, like a car, and they've broken it down into roughly 5 to 6 gears. And, you know, gear 1 and 2 is nasal in, nasal out, in kind of relaxed, and then asymmetric and symmetric. And then gear 3 and 4, which is in through the nose, out through the mouth. And then gear 5 and 6, which is in through the mouth, out through the mouth. So what they've found is that roughly the first 2 gears, so in through the nose, out through the nose, and maybe the 3rd gear, which is kind of soft, in through the nose, out through the mouth, those first 3 gears, you're kind of within your aerobic capacity. You kind of stay within aerobic capacity. But after that, on gear 4, 5, 6, you're now starting to move into anaerobic capacity. And I'm sure you know what those are, you know what those 2 different states are. And so what they found is that during aerobic capacity, so when, you know, mostly when you're nasal breathing, when you're in nasal capacity, aerobic capacity, your cells, so within your cells, there's mitochondria. So the mitochondria is the engine to the cells, basically, and it produces the energy, the ATP. So literally the cellular energy, the life force, it's the energy that drives us, basically. And when you're in aerobic capacity, so let's say when you're mouth breathing, if you're mouth breathing and you're in anaerobic capacity, your mitochondria within your cells, it generates 2 units of ATP, so 2 units of cellular energy. And so when you switch to aerobic capacity, so that's usually when you're nasal breathing in gear 1, 2, or maybe 3, then they've been able to show that the cells, the mitochondria in the cells produce up to 38 units of energy. So 16 times more units of cellular energy. I think it's minus a few other kind of fixed cost kind of things that the cells uses. I think there's like 32 units of energy left or something after it's used up, but that's still 30 or 32 or something like that, more units of cellular energy when you nasal breathe as opposed to mouth breathe, when you're in aerobic as opposed to anaerobic capacity. So just that alone for performance wise, you know, is a no-brainer as to why you would want to mouth breathe as opposed to nasal breathe. But having said that, a little caveat for mouth breathing is that if you specifically use mouth breathing to train for certain kind of techniques, things like, for example, Wim Hof Method uses mouth breathing, or maybe, for example, rebirthing, holotropic, transformational, some of these like different breathing techniques, they use your mouth, they use mouth breathing. So when you do mouth breathing sometimes for specific reasons and for specific training purposes, then it's fine if you know what you're doing. It's just mouth breathing when you're at rest, when you're unconscious about that you're doing it, and also breath holding, not just a mouth breathing, but breath holding and shallow breathing. Any of these things that you do unconsciously during rest or whenever, those things are bad for you. But if you know what you're doing them on purpose for a specific reason, then it's fine.
Yeah, I think the term that gets slanged around a lot is chronic mouth breathing, which is, you know, where just your default breathing pattern is through your mouth. And I think listeners probably listening to this are probably, like I have been the whole time listening to you speak, Brian, been thinking about my breathing and where it's coming from, whether it's nasal or mouth dominant, you know. And then the second part is actually, when it is nasal, is it actually, you know, going to the diaphragm, or is it still, you know, chest biased breathing? Something that, you know, a lot of these guys that you've been talking about that I follow as well, you know, really advocate that nasal breathing should be pretty much how we're living, you know, 99% of our life, if not all of it. And then, you know, for someone who took that and tried to implement it into my life immediately, some of the places I started to really think about was sleep. So, you know, as the moment I lay down in my bed and started to think about sleep, I noticed a default pattern where my body wanted to go to the mouth. For whatever reason. And, you know, I've been tried to be very conscious about whilst I'm still awake and in the process of going to sleep while I'm in bed, to really focus on bringing, the breath to the mouth. And I don't really know for sure if I actually
have you done the mouth taping thing where you tape your mouth shut?
So I haven't done the mouth taping yet. I'm a little bit scared to do it, to be honest.
It works.
Yeah,
I do it. It works.
Yeah, and so actually, just on that, so just folks listening at home, the concept of taping your mouth basically stops you breathing through your mouth and basically forces you to breathe through your nose. And apparently, miraculous effects on like the deepness of your sleep, REM sleep, and just like overall just sleep quality. Apparently, it's massive for a lot of people who are chronic mouth breathers. Realize the first time they tape their mouth, they have like the most amazing night's sleep. I haven't got to it yet. I also know that quite a lot of folks are selling nose strips, which kind of like help encourage, open up the nasal passage to help with nasal breathing as well. In fact, I will do it tonight. You're going to hold me to that. But in terms of the tape that you're using there, I have a question to ask. What tape should we be sticking on our mouths?
I believe you can just use some sort of micropore tape. I use this tape that I use to tape my fingers for jiu-jitsu. It's like that Johnson's kind of sports tape.
Gotcha.
So I just use that. As long as it doesn't rip your skin off, that's fine. And the thing about taping your mouth, it sounds kind of scary because when we think of mouth, taping your mouth, you think of like suffocation and kidnapping and horror movies and stuff like that. But what it's really doing is you're not trying to seal it shut. What you're trying to do is you're trying to train your mouth, your jaw, and your mouth to stay shut when you sleep. And when it stays shut, it redirects the breathing to your nose. And so after everything I've mentioned with nasal breathing and mouth breathing, you want, the 7, 8 hours that you sleep, you want obviously the best oxygen, the best air quality that you're getting. And when you nasal breathe, you're kind of more in a parasympathetic state. You're more in a relaxed state, which is how you should be when you're sleeping. But if you mouth breathe, your body kind of recognizes mouth breathing as a stress response. So a lot of times when you're sleeping, if you're one of those people that doesn't sleep very well, or you sleep with one eye open, or you wake up halfway through the night, a lot of times you wake up because you're mouth breathing, because it's a stress response, and your body recognizes stress response, and you kind of wake up, you shock yourself awake. So with the taping the mouth, what I would do is I wouldn't tape it like that. Okay, what I'll do is just get like a Charlie Chaplin size, strip and just do it there. Yeah, so you can leave the sides open, so you don't have to freak out. You don't have to worry about suffocating and stuff like that. It's just really keeping it shut, and that's it. And your body's the suffocation thing with the body. Your body's gonna fight really hard before it even. It's just not gonna automatically. You're not just gonna fall asleep and just suffocate and die. Your body's gonna have a reflex. It's gonna fight. When you drown, for example, you're fighting. Your body's fighting. So, people that are a bit worried about that, like I know, because the night before I did it, I said my prayers and I said, if I don't wake up, I don't wake up kind of thing. But I had a bit of a fear. I had a bit of a fear that I might not wake up from it. But I actually ended up sleeping about 5 or 6 hours that night. And usually if I sleep 5 hours, anything under 7 hours, I feel pretty crap. But that night, 5 hours, I felt it was like the best sleep I've had in years.
And is that something you're now doing every night, right?
No. I did it for about the first 3 months. And I believe now I've kind of retrained myself to keep my mouth shut. But having said that, like for example, James Nestor says that some people, the structure of their skull, how their jaw is, it opens up anyway. So for some people, it might be something that they need to do forever if they want to keep it up. But for most people, they should better retrain it after like a couple months or something.
Yeah, nice. Okay, I'll be doing that tonight. Okay, then I think the next place to think about nasal breathing, in terms of people listening to this and wanting to make, instant action and see if they can implement this into their life. I guess, at rest while you're working, be conscious of what you're doing and try to just be aware of where your breath's coming from. And I guess a simple switch up, we all know how to breathe through our noses, and if you do notice that you're breathing through your mouth excessively or aggressively, to switch that up and take, your inhales and exhales through the nose and through the belly. Now, the bit that I struggle with, and I imagine a lot of people listening to this will be, a lot of our listeners are people who are training, quite religiously and consistently in the gym, specifically with kind of 2 places I found it tough. Number one is when doing heavy strength training, kind of when you're going for that Valsalva breath and going for a big brace before a heavy lift, especially when you're spinally loaded like a squat or a deadlift, and you know, being able to keep it nasal there. And then the more obvious one is when doing energy system training, you know, whether it's aerobic work or, you know, let's just call it metabolic conditioning. You know, I even today, you know, did some aerobic work. I was on a rower, on a ski erg, and an assault bike. And I was probably working at kind of, I'd probably say like a 7 out of 10 RPE, and tried to keep the whole session purely nasal breathing. And I got to about 3/4 to a session. Heart rate still probably about 145. And I just couldn't maintain my nasal breath at that intensity anymore. So, you know, then I basically was forced, if I wanted to work at that pace, to then go back to breathing through my mouth until, you know, I'd have a rest period and try bring it back down again. So I guess the question is, you know, if you're trying to incorporate or implement nasal breathing in your life, especially with your training, you know, for a lot of people to keep it as a nasal breathing training session, they're probably going to have to take the intensity and the output out of it quite a bit. All right. Otherwise, like I just talked about, they'll be forced into having to breathe through the mouth. Now, obviously, let's take away like competitions and whether you're an athlete or not. Is it therefore better in the process of, you know, developing the ability to tolerate more CO2 and start breathing through the nose with everything you do, to have to start taking the intensity out of especially those aerobic sessions and kind of build up capacity, then over time start to increase capacity with it? Or are you saying that, you know, do as much as you can nasally, and then the moment you have to breathe through your mouth, just move to your mouth? What would you recommend?
I mean, to be honest, I don't really know. I don't really have like a fixed thought on that right now, because literally today I was reading something that was saying that that we shouldn't really be in anaerobic capacity that often, and that actually damages the body the more we're in
For
it.
sure.
So
I agree.
yeah, so I mean, if you kind of base off that, then yeah, you would want to keep your exercise or whatever you're doing as much to nasal breathing as possible to keep it in aerobic capacity.
Yeah.
But having said that, when I train myself, when I train, you know, jiu-jitsu, whatever I train, you know, there's times I push myself into anaerobic capacity and really try to just test my limits and push myself to the very edge. And I feel like that over time increases my baseline of, you know, like when I push myself to the edge. But at the same time, you can also push that baseline, increase that baseline higher and higher as well, by just keeping it to nasal capacity, to nasal breathing, and see, you know, improve like what your limits are, what you can handle, what your baseline performance is, or how you can maximize that just based off nasal breathing alone. So I think you will kind of, I don't know, like I kind of work with both. You know, obviously I focus more on nasal breathing, but you know, at times I do kind of push myself in the aerobic capacity as well. And I think that kind of mirrors why you want to do mouth breathing as well. So, you know, nasal breathing, I'm sure, you know, your listeners and, you know, the people that are into health and wellness and exercise and stuff like that, they want to focus on nasal breathing to help performance because of everything, you know, you and I have mentioned throughout today's podcast. But also another thing as to why you might, for example, mouth breathe when you're doing like things like the Wim Hof Method or something, is that when you're mouth breathing, for example, and you're hyperventilating almost, they call it superventilating, but it's, you know, it's more or less hyperventilating when you're doing the Wim Hof Method, or similar kind of exercises like XPT or shift and stuff like that.
So basically aggressive inhale, exhale, continuous.
Yeah, exactly. It's like gear 5, 6 through the mouth, out through the mouth kind of thing. And you know, like what it does, and this is something that I kind of learned from Dan Brule, and Dan Brule is one of my teachers. He's Tony Robbins coach, Navy SEALs coach, and he's another guy that's got like 40 plus years on experience on breath work. And I just a side note, I mean, he's literally doing a course this Friday, Saturday, Sunday in Hong Kong. So if anyone wants to check that out, he's absolutely amazing. He's on the same level as Wim Hof, in my opinion, in terms of the breath. But anyway, so when you breathe in that kind of, when you're kind of superventilating or hyperventilating, you're putting your body into that stress state. You know, you're kind of triggering a stress state, as, you know, the same state as how you would be in if you were going through a panic attack or anxiety attack or something like that, right? So you actually, on purpose, you're triggering that high stress state. And what you're doing is when you're actually going through that high stress state, you know, you're actually you're retraining yourself to respond in a calm way. You're retraining yourself to handle that intensity with calmness, try to combine, that intensity with calmness, try to combine it together. And what happens is, because when for example, when shit really does hit the fan in daily life and your body does go into a high stress state, when you're in a high stress state, it kind of switches to, like your very kind of primordial kind of like functions of the human body, like the very kind of primitive functions, the lizard brain, those kind of, and logic and conscious, and your neocortex and stuff, that's all gone, that's out the window. And the only thing that you divert to is what you're used to, your training. And if you're in that high stress situation, a panic attack or something, and you're freaking out and you haven't trained your breathing, you haven't trained how to stay relaxed and calm during these high intensity situations, then you're going to respond how you always respond, which is, maybe you freak out, maybe, fight or flight or freeze or play, stuff like that, right? But if you've been training yourself to stay calm during these intense situations, with the breath, triggering those states and being able to maintain your calmness and train that, build that kind of new neural pathway or that new response to that high level of stress, then when shit hits the fan in daily life, then you can revert back to your training of the breath. And you can learn to stay grounded, stay calm, or at least manage that state more than someone that hasn't done that training. And that's what Dan Brule would say, is like, it doesn't matter what's around the corner, what's going to happen in life. Personally myself, so it doesn't matter, using his breath as a tool to hack his state, to be able to manage his state, his stress, his energy, and all that kind of his consciousness and stuff. He's able to, he knows there's nothing to fear, because the biggest tool that you have to handle anything in life is literally right here, and it's your nose. I mean, just kind of expanding that a tiny bit. If you're into Andrew Huberman, I mean, they talk about not just using the breath to tap into your nervous system, to hack your nervous system and the different states. Andrew Huberman, he also studies your vision, your eyes, and how your vision and your eyes can also help you to manage your state, using the way you see to kind of basically swing your nervous system between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So basically, this whole thing about breathing and vision and all these kind of tools, these are all tools. And these are tools, basically using your mind to control some function of the body, some mechanism of the body, to then change your mind and shift and pivot, control your mind. So you're using your mind to change the body, to change the mind, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because you can't use the mind to change the mind. It's almost impossible. That's why when people try to meditate, when they're stressed out, it's almost impossible, because their body, their nervous system, mental, physical, emotional states are stuck in a sympathetic state. Like on a chemical level, you got cortisol, adrenaline, all these kind of chemicals in this state, and they're just trying to sit there and they're trying to think their way out of that kind of stressful state. So which is why, most people and all my students will say the same thing. When they're stressed out or going through anxiety or depression or fear, whatever, it's very difficult to meditate then. But when they're calm and relaxed, then it's easy to meditate. But it's really when you're stressed out, that's when you really need to be able to use these tools. When you're calm and happy and relaxed, you're already calm and happy and relaxed. You don't necessarily need that kind of that meditation or breath work, whatever you need. You need it during those times where you're freaking out, where you feel like there's no other option,
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly why we all train in the gym. We're training in the gym we're putting stress on our body deliberately to allow us to, if we're athletes, to allow us to, when it's game day, be able to operate on autopilot and have, strength, mobility, skill sets to access whenever we need to, that's going to allow us, to perform as best we can. But, really, like, where the breath comes into it is like, we're exposed to stress, pretty much almost every minute of every single day. There's an opportunity for something to trigger that sympathetic system. So that's a cool way to put it. It's essentially training your ability to handle stress, which comes back to really what you said at the start of this episode, which is that people who do nasal breathe in general, have a greater tolerance of stress as well. And I think when I think about that straight away, I'm already start thinking about it as like how can I incorporate this into people's, training programs? And at the end of the day, it is still training, and whenever you're trying to change someone's physiology by doing deliberate practice, like, it's hard work. And I know that this breath training work, when actually done, properly is it's challenging stuff. It's definitely not, as easy as just going for a walk on a path and breathing through your nose and expecting that's going to create, wholesale changes to your life. For most people, it might actually make a significant difference alone. But, when you're really trying to change that physiology in those really high stress states, it's quite unpleasant stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not as easy as some people say. I mean, you can obviously do like very basic breathing techniques like, box breathing or combat breathing or 4-7-8, something like that, to just help you kind of relax and stuff during the day. Like, that's something that people can do straight away and really have real-time results, and literally feel right then and there. So it is very powerful. But as you said, the value comes in the consistency in building these kind of using these tools and really just integrating them into your daily life. I get a lot of people that come to my workshops, come to my seminars and stuff, and they will come as a one-time thing. They see it as, it's a great experience to have. It's great to get a selfie in the ice bath for Instagram or whatever, right? But the value comes in, and I see it in my students, certain students that, they're consistent with the breath, and they keep practicing these breathing techniques or ice baths and stuff like that. And that's where the real value comes in, and that's the difficult part. It's, because breathing is one of those things where, we thought we could do perfectly, but it's actually something that we have to start from scratch again. And anytime we kind of have to step outside our comfort zone, especially as an adult, it's not easy. We want to kind of stay within our comfort zone. And I'm sure, someone like yourself, you see it all the time when you're training people, you're kind of pushing them outside their comfort zone. But breathing is something that's, it's less tangible because you can't really see it. And when you can't see things, you don't, it doesn't have the same impact on it until you really understand it as well. So I can understand why breathing and breath work, it's starting to get popularity now, but I can understand why a lot of people might, dismiss it, or, because we, as human beings, we tend to overcomplicate things. We'll tend to think that the answers are, some complicated thing where, it's ironic how funny nature is. One of the biggest things to hack our performance is literally like right in front of us the whole time. But we go looking elsewhere. We go, do all these crazy things. So it's right there.
Yeah. I mean, Brian, I could sit here and talk to you about this kind of stuff all day. I mean, I think we're gonna have to save it for another episode. I want to talk about strategies, techniques, implementation, how, folks can start putting this into their day and start seeing, major changes, with their health and with their resilience and their ability to handle stress. But, I think there's a lot of information there already for folks to sink their teeth into. So Brian, let me ask you, just to kind of wrap this up, where can people find out more about you and what you're doing? And if people want to work with you, whether it's one-on-one or in a workshop, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, just reach out to me. Instagram is probably where I'm most active, I'm most updated. Primal Breath Work is my handle, Primal Breath Work, one word. Otherwise, my website is primalbw.com. Just shoot me an email, shoot me a message if you want to kind of know more about this stuff. I'm always there to help anyone through breathing and who wants to learn more about breathing. So hit us up through the channels.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll put those details in the show notes, guys, so you can access it there. Well, Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. This will not be the last you hear of me on the Live Perform Compete podcast. We need to get our second show booked in ASAP. But mate, thank you very much for all that you do. And keep up the great work.
Awesome, dude. No worries. Thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed the chat.
Been a pleasure, buddy. See you later.
All right.